Hey, Sean here from SpeedCubeReview.com. I have a very special guest today. She has a PhD in system sciences, is a distinguished professor at Binghamton University in New York, with her curriculum focusing on steganography. She's an incredible photographer, but is most recognized in the cubing community and might be the most recognizable name in the cubing community. In the 80s, she helped develop the most popular method known today, also referred to as a Fridrich Method, participated in the 1982 World Championship, and then again in 2003, placing second. Without her influence in the cubing world, there'd be no telling what it would look like today. Thank you for being here, Jessica Fridrich.
Hello.
Did I get any of that wrong? I know that was a long intro. Did I get any of that incorrect or any of my pronunciations?
No, you got everything right.
Awesome. Thank you. So I'm going to ask questions in hopefully more of like a chronological order so we're not jumping around in time too much. And I think one of the first things I just kind of want you to tell is the story of how you purchased your first puzzle. I believe I saw on your website you had one before from like a family that visited, but the first time you purchased one was a little difficult because of the situation. Could you tell that story?
Yeah, it's kind of difficult for people to understand if they haven't lived in Eastern Europe in the 1980s. You will probably look at me like I'm totally crazy, but you could buy the cube just about everywhere else in Austria, West Germany, but not in the Eastern Bloc, because the economy was completely screwed up and, the supply market and, the chains were broken. So we couldn't just go and buy the cube. It was on sale in Hungary, but it was really in high demand. So there were stories of people just going to Budapest, and just getting one. And we would ask for, the cube just about everywhere. And in the end, we bought it from a street seller, who was selling them like in brown bags and looking around, obviously for higher price. And this is how I got my first cube, my own. And it would take at least like one more year to be able to just go, to a toy store in Czech Republic and buy it.
Your family, from the sounds of it, you had a family that was really into arts and math and science. And I read or saw a story where you and your dad just built a telescope, which that baffles my mind. I mean, you explained how it happened, how it works, but still, I'm like, I don't know how that exactly happens. Was your dad interested in the Rubik's Cube at all?
No, he really wasn't. I think it was way over his head. Like, you have people who decide right from the beginning, that I'm not gonna do that. This is like way over my head, and I'm not going to even touch it. So he was one of those people, but he was very handy. He was very good with his hands, and he could fix cars, sewing machines, just about everything, refrigerators, TVs. So he was really not really a math person, but really good with his hands and kind of common sense. Thinking, the pure logic.
Mm-hmm. When you before you got the puzzle, you mentioned that you were already trying to figure out how to solve it before you actually had your own. You were kind of drawing out patterns. There was a primitive method from, is it the Hasnt magazine? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in that, even in the magazine, you mentioned on your website, there's a commutator principle. Could you describe what that method was, or what the commutator principle was?
Well, basically you do a sequence of moves that has structure A, B, A inverse, B inverse. So you do A, a couple of moves on top of B, then you do the inverse of A and inverse of B reverse. And if the group was commutative, if you could interchange these, that this should be identity. But this is a non-commutative group, so it does something. And so you can actually do these with different A and B and look at what it does to the cube. And for this, you don't actually need the cube. If A and B are simple enough, you could figure out where the corners go, how they are turned, what happens to the edges. So you could do this primitive algorithm design even without a cube. And this is the commutator principle. And a lot of algorithms, like for pretty patterns, for example, and even for speed cubing, are designed as commutators. Even though nowadays what speed cubers use is optimized for a certain type of speed cubing, not necessarily for the number of moves. Yeah.
That sounds like, do you know anything with blind methods?
A little bit, but not much. Yeah.
So
you know a lot more.
What a lot of the fast solvers use is all commutators, so usually solving all edges and solving all corners. And so with speaking of even optimized, I was last week talking with someone who is really, I think, top 10 in the sum of ranks, like all the events combined, and around 30 seconds, I believe, with blind. And he was talking about how he was switching one edge for another of like what the buffer edge is, but switching one edge because doing another one saves fractions of seconds with the commutator that they're using. So it's even optimizing which angle you do that commutator. I've thought about getting into more advanced blind, but that just seems like a lot of... It's gotten so optimized. It's way beyond my thought process now.
I have utmost respect to anybody who can do these huge numbers of blindfold solves. These are superhuman to me. I would never be able to do anything like this. It's absolutely amazing.
There's a magazine that described a layer-by-layer method for that was sort of introduced you to that method. What magazine was that?
Do you want a Czech name or?
Yes, I guess, or that, or a translated one too. Maybe both.
Okay, so it's VTM, VTM in Czech, Věda, technika, mládeži, and it means science technology for youth, basically. And this is where there was the first layer-by-layer algorithm, set of algorithms method that I would begin with. Because it came out at about the same time when I got my own cube, finally.
Was there someone specific who worked on that layer-by-layer algorithm?
Obviously the author.
Yeah, do you know who the author was?
Geez, we could probably trace it back, with help going into the archives, but I don't know the author, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah, there is one person, I'll have to look up the name, that had some layer by layer in like 1980 and then published it in a book. Starts with an S. I'll think of it.
I'm pretty sure that many people invented something similar. It's a very natural approach. So there will be many co-inventors at about the same time. Well,
on that note too, I wanted to ask. So when you published your algorithms in a magazine, was it the Mladý Svět? How do you pronounce that?
Mladý Svět. It means young world.
Okay. So how? And when that was right after Nationals, I believe.
Yes.
Okay. And the person that was interviewing or putting that together asked for a name, and you called it the Fridrich Method. Since there are other people around the world that were kind of working on it, would you still consider it the Fridrich Method? Do you think it should be called anything else? I'm kind of don't mean to call you out on it. I'm just wondering your opinion on it.
It doesn't matter what I think, right? I mean, the history will take its own path. So you can call it whatever you want. You can call it CFOP. You can call it a Fridrich Method. It happened so many times in history when an algorithm, let's say, or a methodology, or maybe even mathematical theorem, bears the name of the person, not necessarily who was the first, but who made it the most popular. So, Newton invented calculus after Leibniz, right? But Leibniz had really difficult notation. So it was Newton who, in the end, is credited with calculus. And I'm pretty sure that people developed something similar to CFOP concurrently or even before me. And I don't know if it really makes any sense to dig there, who was the first. If
someone were to describe you as, would you call it yourself the inventor, the pioneer, or whatever anyone wants to call it?
Well, I hope that I helped the cube come back in 1990s by posting the system on my website. So I think that's fair to say.
When you were averaging, you posted on your website, I believe it was, that when you're averaging around 35 seconds, you're seeing other people around the world in magazines posting times in the mid-20s, upper 20s, and saying that you felt like you were just racing the world. Were you ever experimenting with different ideas, different methods, or was it kind of just trying to perfect that CFOP method?
somehow it seemed like too late to go to something completely different. So it's much more natural to just keep perfecting, what you use. Just keep going with that. There was no way to communicate, like it is today. And again, might be difficult for people today to imagine that situation, but I would be competing with, other kids at high school or maybe other kids in the city, at some local competitions. But no one got even close. So the only thing I could compete with was, those little articles in a newspaper, like, oh, somebody saw the cube for 22 seconds when I was at 30, and I was like, oh, I have a longer way to go. I need to keep improving. But knowing that it is possible to do, of course, it removes a psychological barrier, as you know.
Yeah.
So that's very important to not have that barrier. So that was helping. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. When it's a little story of mine, because I didn't have a goal, or like I wasn't really trying to compete with anyone because it's gotten so big. I feel like the goal of like getting the world record it's a goal that I think is maybe a bit far for everyone to try to achieve. And when I hit a certain time that I like didn't expect to ever hit, I kind of was like, I'm good, I'm done. I just started experimenting with everything else because I feel like pushing myself for that next goal would be a bit frustrating for myself.
Just like with everything, if you want to be on top of the world, it's a huge amount of work. It takes so much dedication.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing that the cube taught me, that if you really want to be the best at something, you have to be completely consumed by it, kind of like OCD about it. There's no other way. There's no free lunch. Yeah.
When you were creating your algorithms, was that all you? Was there anyone who you were working with or communicating with to help develop the algorithms?
I had a friend, and I think I mentioned his name on my website, Fridrich Method, from the same high school. So we were kind of buddies, and we would do things together. I mean, he was the one who pointed out that like, did you notice that when you flip these two edges using those, using the short 6 move, the shortest move that doesn't do anything else but the last layer, that if there is this T pattern, the whole thing becomes yellow. And I'm like, this is interesting. I wonder how many positions there are. And if we could flip, because we were doing it by first orienting the edges, permuting the edges, orienting corners, permuting the corners. So that was 4 step. And I was like, well, what if we kind of put the permutation at the end and the orientation in the beginning and do them all at once? It would be easier to recognize and easier to recognize the permutations. So then I sat down, I put down all the the possibilities, and then started looking methodologically for an algorithm for each one of them. And that was a trial and error procedure, because there was no other way to do it. Basically, you remove a corner, you put it back in a different way, you take a look at what happened, you take a look at what the inverse does, and until you find them all. So that was the tedious process. Yeah.
I feel like it almost feels opposite nowadays, even for me, because I'll see an algorithm, I'll often just try to learn it, and then I've realized just a couple weeks ago I was messing around with a couple patterns, and I realized, oh, that's just taking a pair out and then putting it back in a different way. And
yeah.
so I'm learning it the other way, where I see the algorithm and then I have to go back and say, how does this work?
Yeah.
There was someone in, I didn't mention at the very beginning, so I'll mention now for everyone. There's a lot of questions asked through the Reddit community, and so there's going to be a lot of questions that are from them. Instead of trying to pick one specific one, I'm going to kind of go through questions and post them in the video. And one person asked about if there was an algorithm that was more tricky than others to either figure out or to become efficient. And they mentioned that the NPLL is the worst, obviously, but I think for me, V would be a little bit worse for me. So is there an OLL or a PLL that you found tricky to figure out or to execute?
Yeah, there was the F one.
Mm-hmm.
The F, yeah, the 2 parallel corners, parallel edges. F was difficult. For a long time, maybe the mathematical mind, behind was kind of pushing me into the shortest ones. Not making the parallel that shortest doesn't mean the fastest, but but I remember the F was kind of resisting a lot. And then for the orientation, like just flipping all four edges, for example, was also something that bugged me because there was nothing shorter than like 12 face moves, and I felt that was too much.
And M moves were not as easily doable on.
You mean the permutation N?
Or no, doing moves on the middle slice on older puzzles. So I was actually wondering on that. On, for example, the OLL that is, let me get this correct, that's shaped like an H, like this.
Yep.
On your website, instead of doing moves that are the middle slice moving, so moving the middle one, you have it as the front, kind of moving it like that. Is that just for notation, or was there a reason that your finger tricks that it'd work better on older cubes to do F slices than middle ones?
I don't think there's any specific reason, but it's probably the way. I mean, it's it's this one right here, so it solves both.
Yeah.
Or this one. I forgot. It depends on. I'm not sure if there's any specific reason why it's put there this way. Cannot tell.
Okay. So you competed in the 1982 World Championship.
Yes.
And after that, at least for the WCA, they don't recognize any competitions until the 2003. Were there other competitions throughout there that you participated in? Because there were other ones throughout then, correct?
Well, I don't know of any, like a global one, like a world championship. I don't think there was any, frankly. I participated in a championship of Czechoslovakia at that time. I ended up second in 1983. And that was it, in Czechoslovakia. And that was my last one. And the next one was 20 years later.
Wow. And so at that one, that was 20 years later, it was the World Championship in Toronto. You came in second place?
Yep.
And first place was your student?
Yes, yeah. Dan Knights, yeah.
Was it actually like was it just someone that you were teaching, or was it actually like a student from school that you had?
No. He lived, in a different place, but he visited Binghamton, and he talked to Mirek Golian and myself. He spent a couple of days. I remember he was doing some rock climbing with Mirek, some bouldering, and he was learning from us. We were giving him tips, for how to improve, and we could tell even when we met him at that time that he was very talented, and one day he would be really good. Yeah.
I was looking on the WCA board, and you haven't competed since 2007. Is there a reason for that?
Oh yeah. Well, if you are not competitive, why compete? Would you compete if you come up with the last one? You wouldn't, right? So yeah. And you only did 3x3. Was it just fascination with 3x3? Oh yeah, it's the classic. I'm like a purist, I like the pure form, a simplicity. So while it's interesting, and I have my own collection, even though not nearly as big as you.
I thought about blurring this. I'll let you know that.
No, it's actually impressive. Good thing you don't live in any earthquake-prone area, right?
No, but I have dogs with tails that just whip by it and knock so many off.
Should that wall behind you flip, you might be the first person who get killed as being buried by Rubik's cubes.
Let's hope Michigan doesn't have too many earthquakes. There's an event though that I am just extremely fascinated in, which is fewest moves, FMC. Have you ever tried doing like fewest move solving? I
dabbled in it, a little bit, like with Mirek. He specialized on it, but I never really did it on a competitive, in a competitive fashion. I did something in the middle, like doing it, let's say in 30 seconds, but in the fewest moves, or something like that, kind of like a medium. I don't know how to.
Yeah.
It's not a marathon. It's not the 100 meters dash. It's like the 800 meters run, or something like this.
Yeah, there's been a lot of in the past just few years, a lot of push with fewest moves too, because the there's so many ideas with it where if you take the scramble and you invert the scramble and solve that, you can invert your solution and that solves the original scramble. Or a lot of the main idea is just you solve as much as possible with block building and orienting edges or orienting pieces, and then you throw commutators somewhere in your solution that solves other pieces. So there's a lot of fun things with that. Actually, with that, there's I believe it pronounced Thistlethwaite.
Yes.
So that was originally people will use that term for a method of solving fewest moves, which if it's the computer program's the same thing, is where it orients all the edges and corners, and then you solve the rest of the cube with 180-degree moves. So I'm assuming the program's like that. There was a program before that, which, for people watching, that program was then used to find as optimal solutions as possible, so it was getting 20-move solutions. Not the most optimal, but pretty close. Before that, there was a program called Cosiemba.
Yeah, Cosiemba was the first, I think, 1992. That was huge. That was huge. When I learned about this and I installed my machine, I was like incredibly impressed. That was a revolution. Yeah.
Do you know how it worked? How it figured out more optimal solutions?
I don't know the details, but I think it's again working by reducing the cube. Oh no, these are search algorithms. Oh, so I should start babbling because I don't really know, and I'm sure there are different versions of it. Different generations. So I don't want to be babbling on a topic that I don't really have the expertise.
Okay, that is perfectly fine. A lot of times I hear people say that you have to be good at math to solve the cube, or solving the cube helps you be good at math. And I hear, people either are one side of the camp or the other. And I was wondering if you feel that that's the case. Maybe it was in the early 80s when you had to figure out things on your own compared to now where it's just a list of algorithms you could learn. So do you have any thoughts on being good at math means that you'll be good at the cube?
It's not that simple, but there's a strong link, obviously. I think that the cube has the power to bring someone to like math, and I'm sure that happened many times. I'm also pretty sure, because I know that people who love math, they get attracted to the cube as an interesting, huge group. So, a lot of theorists, a lot of group theorists went into and started being interested in the cube to demonstrate efficiency of certain search algorithms. It's like so iconic that if you want to show that you came up with a new search algorithm to search a finite group that is really huge, using the cube as a kind of testing or proving ground is a good idea. So it kind of goes both ways. To answer the question whether you need to be good at math to solve the cube well, of course not. We have little kids who are incredibly fast, so that there's a lot of intuition behind this. You are grasping some pure mathematical concepts kind of on an intuitive level, and that's kind of naturally happening in some brains. So yes, there's a huge relationship there, but I don't think being good at math doesn't mean you're going to be good at cube and vice versa. So
I'm going to kind of go back to your solving method. So at first you talk about that you solve the first layer, so solve the plus sign, the cross, solve the corners, and then either before or after you solve the middle layer, you flip the cube over. So at first if I'm reading correctly, that you solved the corner and then the edges and then the last layer. So I'm wondering when it was that you switched to trying to do the first two layers all together, and when it was that if that's true, if you used to flip the cube over, if you still do between those two steps.
Yeah, nowadays nobody flips the cube, right? Because it's so expensive, I know. But of course, we are, during my times, we were not solving the cube in 3-point-something seconds or 5 seconds. So if you had told me that, then I would say you were absolutely out of your mind. initially I was actually doing the cross, and then putting actually the corners, and then I during the first championship in Czech Republic in 1982 and at the World Championship, I was inserting two middle edges from the last layer into the middle one. So it was not really the F2L. It was a different system that was not particularly efficient. And then I noticed that there were some people who were inserting the corner always with the corresponding edge. And I'm like, I started kind of toying with this, and I realized, gosh, this is so fast. After a couple of weeks, I shaved off like 2 seconds of my average. So that was, it's so intuitive. You don't need to really do any algorithms. You kind of develop them as you go. So I instantly adopted this and replaced the older version with the way it's done today.
So more after the first World Championship that you noticed that.
World Championship, yep.
Okay. And in an interview I was watching, for C you mentioned it means center. Is that true? Was that because I've always heard it mean cross?
Yeah, of course it's cross. I don't know if I had said that, it might have misspoke or something. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, I was watching it with my wife and another person, and immediately my ears perked up. Like, wait, have we been calling it the wrong thing this whole time?
No.
I went back and rewound it. I was like, I need to make sure I watch this. Okay, so yeah.
You said that? When did I say it?
Yeah, it was in the American something. I forgot what that interview was called, but. Yeah, it was in there somewhere.
I probably misspoke, yeah.
All right, so in the past 5 or 10 years, so you have a more modern cube with you. We were talking about just before we got started that it's a Volk Power, and but you still do your kind of original finger tricks with it.
Yeah, you know what? I would have to relearn everything, basically. I would have to really relearn and do it the right way. I'm sure I could be faster. It's just difficult for me to find time to invest into this. I'm also older, so it's not that easy to learn new things so fast. I'm kind of blurred, the old fashion of twisting the cube with the modern one. So I'm finger pushing more now. I call it finger pushing. You have to understand that finger pushing was not really a good way to twist the cube in 1982 because the cube technology was just not there. And how well you can finger push really depended on how well you adjust the cube for your hands, how well you lube it and stuff. Because they were all one design. There were actually two designs only. Either there were like a round corners that the centers were round underneath, or they were flat, and the round were kind of less forgiving if you were not accurate enough. So, but the cube was more holding in one piece. The flat centers would disintegrate on you and explode, and then you would have a DNF or something.
Yeah. Well, back at jumping around in time, even though I didn't want to do that. In 1982, the cubes they used for the World Championship, you weren't allowed to use your own puzzles.
Yes, that was really a big mistake there. Yeah.
So were they were Rubik's brand puzzles out of the box? Or were they just a mishmash of different things?
I think they were just new cubes. And I'm saying it not because I didn't place well there. I was like on the 10th place or something. But and I know Minthai, when he hears me, he always said that I whine about this too much. He's probably right. I whine about it too much. But I don't think it was fair. I mean, it should have been allowed, to let people use their own. Imagine that they would change, the white against blue instead of white against, say, yellow. How would you feel about this? It would completely mess you up, right?
Yes. Yeah. And what was the color pattern that was used? Because did people... It was that one?
Yeah, I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones, yeah.
Was it different in other countries automatically, or just people just sort of create their own color patterns?
I think there were like two different manufacturers, and one would do white against blue, and one was white against yellow, and they used white against yellow. Yeah,
okay.
This one. I don't get bothered by mirror coloring because I'm not on that level. But I can imagine that if you give a top speed cuber today a mirror, if you flip orange and let's say and
Oh,
red,
yes.
you will completely mess them up.
Yes. A lot of the really fast solvers I've heard mention that you
Yeah.
just can't think. You don't think when you
Yeah.
solve, which
Yeah, exactly.
I'm still at a point where I have to think. But if you're not thinking and the colors are reversed, there's no way that's going to
You're
work.
done. Yeah, you will be completely messed up. Yeah, you should be. If you are really that good, you should be completely messed up if somebody did that. Yeah.
Yeah. And during that World Championship, I believe you said before it started, your personal record was around 18 seconds. And on your website, you also mentioned that you don't really count times if there's any sort of skip, like if it ends up skipping the last layer or OLL, or it was a very easy F2L. And so I guess what's the reason for just ignoring those times?
I think you got the numbers a little bit wrong.
Okay.
I mean, 18 seconds, when I was at my best, like way back in 1983, I was averaging about 17, and my corrected personal best was 10 seconds. So it wasn't that bad. It wasn't 18, but of course, 10 seconds is still extremely slow. But so I had this rule that if I skipped more than 2 of the faces, that I called it like a too much of an outlier, and I would just chop it off and not count it. Like somebody would just not mix the cube properly, for example, and you could kind of take advantage of that and maybe have too many simple cases. If it's not a properly mixed cube, you cannot count it. You shouldn't count it. And of course, the last one, after you orient, well, that happens once in every, how many, 200, I forgot, 210, right, or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, unless you're helping it, which you can increase the chances, right? So so I would count that. But if I did the first 2 layers and this one, was solved, I would discard that because you should do some work in the last layer. But of course, this has a distribution, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna happen if you solve the cube sufficiently many times.
And
so you can have a different attitude towards counting it or not counting it.
Yeah, and it just dawned on me about, like, nowadays on our phones we have scrambles that will be what you would have at a competition, but if I was just scrambling it on my own or I had someone else scramble it, I wouldn't even count that at all, no matter how full the time was. So since we don't have an application that will scramble it like a competition would, that creates a whole different situation.
If you have like an automatic scrambler, that really does 26 random moves, then I would say count it. Don't exclude anything.
What was the corrected solve time? Or you said that it was 17, but corrected was 10 seconds?
Yeah, the corrected record personal best was 10, yeah.
What does that mean, corrected?
Well, if I solved it in 7 because this thing got solved by itself, I would discard that. So corrected means that only at most one face would fall out, basically.
Okay. I think I understand. I'm still a little confused at what the corrected one is.
I don't know. I don't think it's that important.
Okay.
It's still excruciatingly slow.
No problem. Since there's been so much study into the cube and so much investigation with organizing algorithms and perfecting different methods, this is more of a, I guess, idea of the magic of the Rubik's Cube, of the Magic Cube. Does it feel like that the magic of it's kind of gone? Does it feel like it doesn't have the same spark that it used to, and it might be a personal thing or just in general?
It's like in a relationship, when you see this thing for the first time, you have a different opinion about it than when you have it, for 2 years and you learn how to solve it. It also is different when no one knew. There were no systems available. No one knew what's the best, what's the best system, what's the shortest path, what is the diameter of the group and stuff. These were the times that were extremely, extremely interesting to me because I'm kind of explorer by nature. I like to explore. I'm not sure if I would get into speed cubing now when it's so well developed, but it was the unknown, you kind of felt like an explorer going into Antarctica or visiting a different planet. you were establishing the bounds. You were writing the history. That was the most appealing aspect of why I got involved in the cube, the unknown, and feeling like, you're perhaps the first one somewhere. That was definitely a huge magic for me. So of course that magic is gone. Now with computers we can do, we can come up with constraints and solve within subgroups, or a subset of faces, and develop algorithms optimized under different constraints. And this is fascinating. This is great. And everybody knows how to do things. It's established. When you look at speedcubers today, they all look the same, because they all kind of use the same system, and they know what not to do because it's not good to do, and they know what to do because it's good to do. But if you went to the World Championship in 1982, everybody would use different system, and some would solve the corners first and then the edges, and a lot of sliced-based algorithms. This approach, I mean, Mintai was using. The Hungarian champion was using this one too. The biolayers was actually, I think it was about half and half. Somebody did the stats there, but it was interesting because you would look at them and everybody had a different twisting style, and it was just really interesting to just see the diversity. And you don't have that diversity now.
Yeah.
You cannot have, because there is no such thing. Maybe you know more about this. How about the rule method? How well are people? That I heard that this has a big promise, and there were people using it, within the first 10. How is it nowadays? What is the current status of the rule method versus the CFOP?
So that's really taking off. Of all other methods that have existed, that one is actually funny too, because I think like 4 or 5 years ago, people were discounting it, being like, no, there's no way. And at the World Championship in Paris, I think it was 3 years ago, in round 1, the person who was first place in round 1 solved with Roux. And then the World Championship last year, the person who came in second place solved with Roux. What's really interesting about it, a lot of people has a lower move count. So with CFOP, average a little over 60 or around 60 moves if you're being really efficient. With Roux, it's around 45 moves. And what's really ends up being the biggest factor, I think why it wouldn't have really worked so well unless you had interesting finger tricks, is it's a lot of slices at the end. So a lot of slices. And even for one-handed, it wasn't utilized very much at first, because people were like, well, you can't do one-handed M slices. But now people are resting the cube on a table partially, and then using their hand to do M slices with part of it on the table. And someone set the world record with Roux, and it was like a week later, 2 weeks later, was beaten again. So, but yeah, so it's taken off, and I have a big fascination with that method. I like experimenting right now. I've actually been for the last month, doing nothing but Petrus, just because I'm having a lot of fascination building blocks and doing edge orientation. But yeah, Roux is definitely one where I think it has a lot more potential than even people think, because there's this where a lot of people will stick to CFOP, or even for other cubes use like a method called Yao, and not do other ones because they're like, well, everyone else does this, so I will do this, and that must be the best because more people use it. So it's sort of this. But I think a lot of it, the change in cube technology has really changed how methods work in the past 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I like fewest moves, because even that, after the fewest moves, the competition is done, everyone gets together. It's like, what'd you do? Okay, I did this. I oriented this, and then I did this way. And so that's where that fascination comes in with me. Couple more quick things. So your main line of teaching and also just work is steganography?
So I'm at the Department of Electrical Engineering, and I teach. I do research. That's my primary, I would say still, that's my primary job here. And I also teach. And I teach 2 courses, detection theory, which is statistical hypothesis testing applied to signal detection, like in noisy observation, stuff like this. And then I teach fundamentals of steganography, which is the art of secret communication by hiding messages in digital images. teach methods how to do this and how to detect this, which is related to digital forensics, which is another field that I'm actively working in. For example, I give you an image and a camera, and I ask you, can you prove that this image came from this particular camera? This is called digital ballistic. When you look at certain statistical properties of the image that are uniquely associated with that particular sensor. So we developed this technique like 16 years ago. It's being used by law enforcement, by the U.S. government. So this is my work, research and teaching. Yes.
I wanted to actually ask if there was any connection with the cube with it, or if you've used, because it seems that this study is also just not, that's more digital photos, but have you tried using a cube as a way of creating information, hiding information, transmitting, encoding things? Is there, I know I'm kind of reaching, I'm grasping for something here, but do you know what I'm referring to, or I'm trying to grasp it?
I think I know, but I get this question a lot, and I always chuckle, and I always wish I could say yes. We have a U.S. patent for this fantastic way of encrypting information with the cube, but I'm probably going to disappoint you.
Okay, that's fair. And then would you consider it a job or a hobby, your photography?
It's a hobby, but will become a job when I retire or something. It's a big one. It's a way to unwind for me. It's a way to disconnect from society and reconnect with nature. I'm a landscape photographer. I love visiting the Southwest, and I love to go there as much as I can. I cannot now, but hopefully I will be able to do again. So yeah, what about the question?
Well, actually, honestly, for that, I didn't even have a question. I was just wanting to bring it up because I'm just so amazed by it. I actually, when I looked at the photos, I didn't even realize, when I looked at some of the photos, I realized my wife and we went to Arches National Park a couple years back, and we always do a bunch of studying, and we realized a lot of the photos were like, oh, this is amazing. Ended up being your photos. So all the time I was like, okay, there's all this connection that I didn't even realize. But no, there wasn't even a question with it. I tried to think of a cube question to relate to it, but it's just fascinating.
Actually, I was just having a discussion about photography with someone on Flickr, and someone said, I'm wondering what's attracting me to your photos, and he said it's not the light, it's not the colors, it's the geometrical patterns in there. It's patterns, cubes. And he mentioned the word cubes, spheres and periodic patterns, shapes. That's what he sees in my work. I'm like, it's interesting because that kind of did bring some connection to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll have to look and notice, because that's what I end up always being fascinated with, and geometric shapes, and a lot of my drawings are that. So, I kind of want to end. I was trying to think of what to end with, and I wanted this really grand question, but I really just kind of want to ask what the most memorable moment in your career has been.
The most memorable moment, like ever.
Could be ever.
Related to cube or something?
I guess I should ask specifically for cubing, but let's do both. Related to cubing and then just ever, unless they're the same thing.
Well, it's, I would say that really winning the nationals in Czechoslovakia was really big, because, and it was funny because since I got my first cube, and I was slow, of course, people were asking me, why are you spending so much time with the cube? And I said, one day there will be a championship and I'm going to win it. I really said that. I was a kid, just a stupid kid. And it's nice to actually make that happen. How many times does it happen in your life? So that was a big thing. My father promised that he's going to stop smoking if I win the championship. And so when it wasn't aired, in real time. It was aired, after it was edited. So I called him and I said, you better throw away your cigarettes. And I remember he was crying, and he would not believe. I don't know if he was crying because he was happy that I won, or he would not be able to smoke anymore. And he tried really hard, but eventually started smoking again. At least I did my part. But that was really something that was very rewarding feeling. That was very rewarding. There were many moments in my life when I felt like we came across something big, something huge, that we discovered something big, like when we discovered, the characteristics of the sensor fingerprint, of the sensor fingerprints for forensic purposes. The student just brought the charts, and I'm like, if you haven't made a mistake, this is gonna revolutionize something. This is gonna be huge, and it ended up being huge. There are many moments that are really memorable, like when my daughters were born. That's probably when I was the happiest in my entire life. So there are many things, there are many moments that are truly memorable, and I'm sure you all will have your own memorable ones. But I want to say that keep pursuing your dreams. Don't give up. Don't let anyone tell you that something cannot be done. I have this famous favorite saying. It's a Chinese proverb that says, "Those who say something cannot be done shouldn't interrupt those who are doing it." So keep doing it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
This has been an incredible pleasure. I thank you very much for joining me here.
No, thank you, Sean.